Today's guest is Frank Reyes. He is the Cloud Solutions Leader within the Technology and Consulting Services Division at Maximus. And Frank is a graduate of the ACT-IAC Voyagers 2019 Leadership Development Program. And through that interaction in the fellows community, Frank and I have had an opportunity to meet and get to know each other. So thanks for coming on the podcast, Frank.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jeremy. It's a pleasure.
So for those who have not a chance to do an event like I did with you and get to know you, talk about your background, where you're from, who you are, and what you do.
Yeah, so, I started off as most folks, in high school and not knowing what I want to do. And so I was really privileged. I went to a really high quality school system at the time. It was a public education, and they had magnet programs, which you're probably familiar. And by middle school timeframe, you kind of had to decide what it is that you were going to do when you grew up,
Oh, wow.
because that determined which of the various magnet schools. You obviously could go to your in-district school or others, but they really tried to push you to that. I'll share a story that most people don't know about me, right? Is my dad had child induced trauma, and it resulted in epilepsy. So
Oh,
so I grew up with, seeing him having seizures, and obviously when I'm really young, I really don't understand that. As I got older, I really conceptualized it, and that was obviously, as I reflect now back, as I'm now a dad, and I'm older and all that wisdom. I realized that it really kind of focused into something that I wanted to do, because I told, like, when I was in middle school, the reason I really cared about math and science because I wanted to figure out a cure for my dad's epilepsy.
mm,
And I asked, when I was in middle school, who does that? And it was, a neurologist and a neurosurgeon, that helped him out. And I said, all right, that's what I wanted to do. So really focused on science and math, and went into a high school program that had an allied health magnet. And I was like, I'm gonna do all that. And also I was like, hey, there's this other interesting thing. They had a JROTC program there. So it's like, okay, Air Force JROTC, I'll try that as well, because the Air Force was cool at the time,
yeah.
and I'm a kid. Then I quickly realized how much schooling a neurologist and a neurosurgeon take, and realizing that I am not that great of a student. I just don't have that. By the way, here's another thing that most people don't know about me. I have dyslexia, and I did not know that at the time. I wasn't diagnosed. Fast forwarding to later, I got diagnosed in the Navy, but we'll get to that. Yeah, so I wasn't really great in English and the traditional humanities, but math and science, super great in it. And once I realized that, I was like, I don't really have the aptitude to be a doctor. I kind of pivoted more into focusing into like the military, because that was really interesting. And obviously, I got to talk to a lot of people like, hey, you don't have to be great in English to be an airman or a service member. I mean, at the time, right?
Right.
Uh, and so, yeah, I think that that desire to be in public service kind of was like instilled at that point, in helping others. And yeah, so from there, I enlisted in the Navy as a nuclear reactor operator. If you're, for those who are prior Navy, I was an ET nuke. And right out of high school, went to nuke school in Charleston, South Carolina. And from there, I was fortunate enough to get picked up by the Naval Academy. And so I went to the Naval
Oh,
Academy prep school. But while I was there, I actually got injured, and I herniated a disc in my back. And Yeah, so they said, so we got two choices. One, this is a disqualifying factor for commissioning. So second, you can either go back to the fleet as an ET nuke, or we'll just release you from service and you can go on college. So I
oh,
took
wow.
the other right, got a GI Bill. And so, yeah, I was like, I'm going to do that. Of course, I mean, if you've ever been an enlisted guy on a submarine cleaning bilges, you're like, I'm not going back to that life anytime soon. Uh, and so, yeah, I went to Florida National University, studied in industrial systems engineering for that. And while I was there, I got picked up by the Department of the Navy. Again, prior military, you have a clearance, you're an engineering student. So I started off, my first job was working at the Naval Surface Warfare Center in Dahlgren, Virginia. So not too far from, a lot of folks in the DC area, but also a little known facility out there. And that was my first job right out of college. And worked, there for about 10 years. Had a non-linear trajectory because while I was there, I got an opportunity to go through a leadership development program that the Department of Defense had. So I had an opportunity to rotate 1 year with the Army and got sent to Afghanistan and was like a chief engineer in Afghanistan during the retrograde operations, leaving Afghanistan. Then I had another year supporting the Air Force Special Operations Command on the AC-130 program. And then had another year that I rotated back to the headquarters at NAVSEA working in Navy ammo.
Wow.
All great experiences. Yeah, I mean, once again, never would, adult Frank go back to kid Frank and be like, this is what your path is going to be. And then, I had some mentors at the time. Because of the program, it was a rapid acceleration in grade. And right, as you know, I had gotten up to a GS-15 very early on. And I got some really good advice in saying, hey, you've kind of moved really fast. Maybe industry, because you don't really have any industry experience aside from some of the internships I had. Um, so try that out. So that was my first foray. I went and worked at a data engineering firm working on national security problems. Uh, did that for a few years, and then you probably get this, like the drive to be in public service is really, really strong. And there was an opportunity with a program called the Congressional Innovations
Mhm.
Fellows, and through a program called Tech Congress. I happened to have heard the director speaking, and I was like, this is it. Like I am in, like I get to go to Congress, I get to short circuit the system, right? Because I had, being in the Department of Defense, I knew how much influence Hill staffers had,
Yeah.
but I also knew the pipeline to get to become one of those senior staffers was a path I had. It was no longer in my line, but this was kind of the hack to it. Did it, loved it. Great experience. They're always recruiting mid uh, career individuals who've worked in technology. I would highly endorse anybody who's looking at that to go do that. But yeah, and then after that, I had an opportunity. We only served 1 year appointments, and I was looking. I want to get back into like my tech chops. I wanted that credibility. So I was looking again at technology providers, and I went to AWS. I went to Amazon, and I worked in their federal security side of the house as a solutions manager over there. Uh, Great experience as well. And then now, Maximus, they were starting to stand up a cloud practice and they had reached out and it was just the right time. And, what Maximus is doing, as a startup in a very large capitalized company to start this, cloud practice from the ground up from, employee zero to building out that team. It was an interesting proposition. And so that's what I do now.
That would be interesting, right? You get to stand one up from scratch. You don't get that opportunity very often in your career.
Yeah, yeah, it's great, and I have a really supportive leader, and it's really interesting kind of dichotomy there of working between, being, like I said, in a publicly traded large company, but a very, small organization that's getting off the ground.
Hmm. So I'm very curious, with what happened in the Naval Academy. I'm curious to know, like, I had never heard that that was an option. Number one, that somebody who, when you enlisted, I had not heard of an opportunity to then still go into an academy. That's a very
Yeah,
interesting thing to point out for people. So that if you're out there and your kids or you have enlisted, it's not too late, right? If you want to go the officer track, and there's many benefits to going the officer track. I did not. I was enlisted Air Force, and in my entire Air Force career, I stayed enlisted. But there's many, very, very many benefits career wise, right? To get into those kind of programs. But I have never heard of that opportunity
yeah.
that if you had a herniated disc, that you could avoid going back to the fleet. Because could you imagine having a herniated disc in the submarine would not be a very fun experience.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be a release of service condition at the time
Yeah.
for it. And it was I have said, there's a common question of like, is your success predicated by you just being great or luck? And for me, it is 100% on the luck. It is, the waypoints in my life. I mean, I don't know what my life would be like had I not left and not gone the Naval Academy route. But I wouldn't have it any other way right now, for because of all the things I kind of talked about, like that trajectory of that. And I still, and you know, in hindsight, like I still got to work with the Navy. I still got to go on, you know, cruisers and destroyers, you know, amphibs, carriers. Like I still got to contribute to the mission. So yeah.
And also work with the other services, which is a unique experience, right? Not very many military people would have that opportunity.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's yeah. I love you know you know if I'm looking back right now, I'm happy, right? There's some things I would you know some window dressing I would clean up on the fringes, but aside from that, yeah.
So now, how is that education choice you made way early on? How has that paid off in terms of, what you do nowadays?
Yeah, right. I work in cloud, and I would say I have not. I tell this to a lot of people. Like, I did not start off in early days of the data center, and then meet your or sorry, let's go even back. I
Mainframe.
was in government when it was the Consolidated Data Center Initiative.
Hmm.
So I got into government in 2009, and still it was the standard 19-inch rack in the office kind of thing, and we had local developers who had their Cisco switches and they had their databases and they did all, right next to us development, right? I didn't share that, I was working in combat system software. So that's kind of where my, industrial systems engineers, you probably have seen this. And that's actually one of the things I will say government is really great at is they look at you having a technical background, but they're willing to train you on just about anything because some of the work is so specific that, when I first got into Dahlgren, I spent my first tour rotating out to other organizations. Like I went to Georgia Tech Institute to learn radar theory
Hmm.
because that's not something that they really teach, and weapon systems engagements, right? Like the Air Force has a very good weaponeering school. Like the government sent me to learn how, because I was working on combat system software for ballistic missile defense. I never took a course like that in college.
Right.
I took, Monte Carlo simulations, and yeah, there's that. But like understanding the underlying technical is what they cared about. But yeah, so that's how I kind of started, and you know, and I've been able to kind of use that technical foundation. And I think that's really is when people always ask, like, what should I major in? What should I do? Or what should I look into? And I would say it's like find something one that you're really interested in, but really pulls in your critical thinking. And that's not always,
Hmm.
STEM degrees, right? I cannot, I've said if I would be able to advise somebody today, like when I was in college, I would think either a computer science or computer engineering degree as your bachelor's, and then a master's in fine arts, an MFA, makes the most rounded person because that individual not only knows, the technical and the problem solving, right? Computer science is about taking big problems and chunking them into smaller problems, and then taking the creativity of an MFA of like, okay, so I'm building the system, and we've probably heard this, right? The failure to imaginate
Yeah.
of like that's how we kind of get usurped or our adversaries come around us around the corner. Having that secondary skill set to think about the what ifs. I mean, even cybersecurity, right? It's mostly humans hacking into other human systems. That perspective I think is really valuable. That I wouldn't just say just focus 100% on the STEM things or not. Because I think also like the technical stuff, like understanding the principles of how things work is also valuable.
Mm. That's fascinating. I have a friend of mine who applied for a job, not realizing that the requirement was a computer science degree, got there, and she had a music and fine arts and music. And she's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I thank you for letting me know what the requirements are. I'll leave." They're like, "No, no, no, no. We're going to do the interview anyway." And she got hired because you're right. Those creative aspects coupled with, some knowledge, and she had knowledge, can solve problems in creative ways that, and I always tell my wife, I've been in IT for 30 years, but don't ask me how to fix something. I know the process to figure it out. Right. So, I mean, my computer science degree, I always look back and go, yeah, they taught me problem solving. They taught me, like you said, figure things out, but they didn't teach me like solid knowledge. All of my true technical stuff, I went to some technical certification path or
Hmm.
some company's education program because that's where the deep technical stuff is. It's not in college.
Yeah. It's I think that that's really, valuable is kind of focusing on that. And I would say now the second thing is writing has been like people ask like, what is something that you wish you knew that you didn't? For someone who has dyslexia, how important writing is.
Yeah.
And you probably have heard that, when I was at Amazon, Amazon has a very strong writing culture. I think that's one of the things that makes that company so successful, is, the focus on being able to articulate your ideas on paper and not on slides.
Mm.
And that really focus. And one of the things that, to Amazon's credit is they have an entire team focused on training people to be better writers, and how to write in the Amazon way. And I took advantage of that. And I now see how important writing, especially as we're seeing aspects of generative AI that really helps that out. Because, I'm one of those that says I have a lot of great ideas. I can't always quickly articulate them in a way that is reflective of my technical expertise in my writing skills versus my speaking skills. And I think that that tool has really helped out with that is, I can outline what it is that I want to get across, run it through many of these chat services, do
Mhm.
it iteratively, do my proof, doing my editing, my copy editing, get it to where I'm satisfied it. And it takes, a good 60% of my effort out of the way to something that, I don't think my employer or my audience really cares exactly if I put the preposition right or wrong, but they would notice it if it was wrong, but they
Mm.
don't care like a machine helped me do it or Microsoft Editor when if I'm typing in real time does it. I think that really has open the aperture for people to be better writers and leaves an excuse, reduces the amount of excuses of like, oh, well, why is your technical doc so terrible? Like, that's on you now. You got machines to help you out.
That is a fascinating point because there are some people I know who are anti-Gen AI. They're worried about what it's going to produce, or is all the content we're ever going to read, is it all AI produced without a human participating? But we forget about the fact that for years and years, just looking at something like Microsoft Word, Microsoft has continued to innovate and add the
Mhm.
grammar capabilities, the third party or first party capabilities, the diversity language. There's a lot of tools we've been already leveraging for years to help us be better writers.
Yeah. You know, I usually I give this example is um your car comes with anti-lock braking system. Most cars you can turn it off. If you turn it off, does that make you a better driver? Or do I think like you're not as good of a driver because you have an assistant to help you so you don't skid on the road when it's wet? In actuality, I think it's reckless if you turn that off. And that's to the point of, we're seeing a lot of code generation and coding assistance. I think for security reasons alone and to get higher quality code, I think that's where you're going to start to see like coding assistants are going to be the anti-locking braking system of development.
Mm.
And I'm like, you didn't do that? Well, you should probably turn that on.
Well, they forget how often a developer Googles for the answer anyway and copies code from someplace else.
Yeah, like I've used Stack Overflow. If before, that there
Yep.
was, before there was Cody or Code Whisperer or any of these, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, or even Reddit or any blog I could find, right? I mean, that's my background. I'm a software engineer, software writer, developer. Yeah, I never reinvented the wheel, and I kept all my own code so I could reuse it again. Yeah, yeah. It's interesting how we get a little uppity about things sometimes.
All right.
So, as you went through your journey, looking back, what's something you wish was done differently, whether it's in the industry at large or, the way we do hiring or the way you move your career or form your career. What's something looking back that you would go, man, I wish that was different, and what would that be for you?
I would say, and speaking to like our industry, right? I think one of the challenges that we have is the ability to move in and out of government seamlessly. As someone who has done that, and Jeremy, you've done that as well. Uh, I think that we, for a variety of reasons, have made that a lot more difficult, and that really has kind of hurt us. I'll give an example of. You usually see this where we have certain waves of really great technologists that come into government, make some seismic shifts, but because of either the hiring authority they came in on, or the system just grinds them and burns them out, um, they move on. And it's usually not one or two. It's usually the wave that brought them in is the wave that brings them out.
Yeah.
And I'd actually say there's a lot of technologists out there and patriots that want to easily go into government, but may just want to do a tour of duty, and they may not want to say, I want to be there for the rest of my life. There are folks who, love public service and they spend 30 years, and we need those individuals. That's where the institutional knowledge. And we've optimized the system for that, right? If that's the path you want to do, if you want to come out of college, go into pathways and, get your platinum coin after so many years of service, then like the system is designed 100% to allow you to do that. It does not allow you to say, hey, I want to do this for a few years, but then I want to go to industry to learn new frameworks, new processes, learn new models, sharpen my skills a little bit, differently than I would as I said, when I came into government, the first thing they did is like, hey, you're right out of college. Here's a contractor team of 35 people. You're in charge, right out of college. Like you don't get that in industry.
Yeah.
And that's actually one of the big things I would recommend people in college is one of the interesting things about government is it's one of the only places that gives you a lot of responsibility um, and oversight that you typically don't get in industry for many, many years later, right? 35 people, and I had, a $60 million budget right out of college, right? Like, here you go. Uh, you usually don't see that for, senior managers or director levels in industry. And you probably GS13s that have $200 million budgets and a contractor workforce of 100.
Yeah.
Right. And that is a good learning aspect. But then being able to go outside, learn new things from the outside, and then saying, hey, I've done my tour of duty out in industry, I want to come back, making that seamless, and then saying, hey, I want to sign up for 4 years, because I think there's a value of making a commitment
Hmm.
to the organization. Helps them plan. It makes sure that you are communicating that I'm just not here to change things and then leave, right? And then have them be able to leave and then come back again. I think that fluidity to move in and out of government um, with the appropriate safeguards, right? And I think we've kind of over-indexed on the revolving door safeguards that exist out there, right? Um,
Although
uh,
typically, I would say many of those are much more concerning at, say, higher level management than they are at the people we're talking about, right?
Yeah, exactly, right. And especially, and I think we've done a really good job of like disclosures on, contract actions, but we don't have a really good, we've seen that with the Defense Fellows Program where it has DoD civilians and active duty go and do a few weeks or I'm sorry, I think it's a few months in the startup community so they can learn
Yeah.
that without actually having to leave either the government or the service. And there's definitely a value, that was mentioned for that. Unfortunately, I think that program was descoped this year, but there's still a handful of others, skill bridge programs and so on and so forth as you're transitioning out.
Yeah.
I think having more of those where you can go out, come back in, go out with the appropriate safeguards, as I mentioned. I think that would really help us because one, it's we have to actually have these out external like ACT-IAC or AFCIA or these other things where you and I can collaborate. You in government, I'm in industry, and we collaborate because of our personal relationships, our passion for, fixing things, and making, everything better for our fellow, citizens. And I think if we have that more and more, and we have our networks out there, I think that would actually get to better communication when we talk about how we do requirements for contracts, how we actually build systems, and how we actually take care of people in government, because they see that, people come in with these really different ways of how they even manage people. That is not, traditionally how the government does it.
Yeah, that's a fantastic idea. Like for instance, yes, I did a time in the military, then I did a time in consulting, DoD consulting, then I came into government again. And you're right, having been on proposal writing teams and technical presentation teams to try to win work, and then on delivery teams to deliver work, coming into government, I go, okay, I can write a better contract. I can write a
Yeah.
better contract because I know what I would have proposed if I was trying to win this work. I understand better the FAR. I understand what I'm allowed to say, what I'm not allowed to say. You're right. Having worked on both sides, and eventually, when I move back out of government into the industry, I'm looking forward to taking all those years of government, right, things, so that when I'm now proposing again on contracts, I go, okay, I know what that person means. Because man, the wacky language we use in government is nuts, right? But I totally
Yeah.
agree with you. I've seen some great programs over the years, mostly in the DoD space, like you were talking about, where they allow somebody to go, say, work for Cisco for 6 months or a year, and then come back, but it's very, very rare. And then
Hmm.
you're right, the hiring authorities don't really, they're not flexible enough to easily get people in the door, let them back out the door, and get them back in the, yeah, this, you're right. There's some work that needs to be done there.
Yeah, and I would love to see that. I mean, because my eyes were, I learned, like, I thought I was a good government person. I spent 10 years in the DoD. And then when I went out, when I went to industry, I was like, oh man, I made a lot of mistakes. And then when I went to the Hill, I brought a lot of that, what I learned as being in the executive branch and then being in industry and writing policies and advising, our members, of Congress. And that in itself is valuable, is like they themselves in that bubble sometimes, are unable to get, field intelligence of what's really happening down on the ground. And I think that's, if you had, I mean, let's solve it for the executive branch, and then let's solve it for the legislative branch, because I think that in itself also will
Mhm.
solve for it. Need some help of, but we're getting, I mean, I will say the technical capacity of Congress has increased orders of magnitude from the early, Zuckerberg, interviews that we saw in the early 2000s, that everyone remembers, that's where it was their aha moment, right? Where they needed more technologists. We're seeing them doing a lot better. We're seeing a lot more technologists in the FTC and the FCC. We're seeing, even in the financial services industry, they're the ones I think are the most forward leaning in bringing in technologies, for technologists into those organizations. So yeah, the more people we can get to come in and come out and do it for the right reasons, the better.
So Frank, what's next for you? What's coming up here in the near future?
So yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, here at Maximus, I'm standing up the cloud practice. We're growing that. We're evolving, to better support our customers. We're not, we are a large company, but in our real operations from a consulting, we're more of a medium-sized company, and that's going to complement. You kind of see my background, our other aspects of it. I think that's where you're going to see a lot more growth in that, and us standing up those capabilities, be given our past performance. It's not that we haven't done this work before; it's just we haven't codified it. It's kind of like the discussion of like Space Force. Space warfare has been around for quite some time, but we didn't have a place to call Space Force. We didn't start the Space Force in 2000, 16 or 19, I think, right? We didn't start the Space Force in 2000. Like, space domain warfare didn't start then. It started
Right.
way before. It wasn't until we brought all of the capabilities together to make it. And that's where we are. Maximus, we're bringing together and standing up our respective practices. So, I'm passionate about doing that mainly because I love working with people, right? It's the first part of any IT transformation. So, we're evolving, and we hope to take those learnings to our customers in the federal government.
Well, Frank, I really appreciate getting to know you better, hearing your story, and thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jeremy. It's been a pleasure, man.